The security guard's words hit me like a freight train. "Ma'am, that's a $3 million Patek Philippe." I stared at the trash bin where my sister Madison had just thrown what she called my pathetic fake watch moments before. The same watch I'd worn every day for the past 5 years. The same watch that had belonged to my mother. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. The morning started like any other Tuesday in the Wright household, which meant it started with Madison's voice echoing through our family's sprawling estate in Beverly Hills. I could hear her from my room, 3 floors up, complaining to our stepmother Caroline about something trivial, probably the color of her new Tesla, or the thread count of her Egyptian cotton sheets. I slipped on my worn jeans and the simple white blouse I'd had since college, fastening my mother's watch around my wrist like I had every morning for 5 years. The familiar weight of it against my skin was comforting, a small piece of my mom that Caroline and Madison couldn't take away from me. "Eliana, get down here!" Caroline's voice pierced through the morning silence like nails on a chalkboard. I took a deep breath and headed downstairs, already knowing this wouldn't be pleasant. The scene in the kitchen was exactly what I expected. Madison sat at the marble island, her perfectly styled blonde hair catching the morning light as she picked at a bowl of organic berries that probably cost more than most people's grocery budget. She was wearing what looked like a designer outfit that could fund a small car, her nails freshly manicured in some trendy shade that matched her accessories perfectly. Caroline stood beside her, arms crossed, wearing her signature disapproving expression. Ever since she married my father 6 years ago, she'd made it crystal clear that Madison was her priority, and I was just an inconvenient reminder of his previous life. "There you are," Caroline said, her tone dripping with fake sweetness. "Madison and I need to discuss something important with you." I poured myself coffee from the machine, noting how they'd already finished the good beans and left me with the cheap backup supply. "What's going on?" Madison looked up from her phone, where she'd been scrolling through what appeared to be luxury shopping websites. "It's about your little job at that nonprofit." She said the word nonprofit tasted bitter. "I worked at Hope Harbor, a youth outreach center in downtown Los Angeles. It wasn't glamorous, and it definitely wasn't profitable, but it mattered. We helped at-risk teenagers find direction, provided tutoring, and connected families with resources they needed. It was the kind of work that actually made a difference, something Madison and Caroline would never understand. "What about it?" I asked. Already feeling defensive, Caroline stepped forward, her Botoxed forehead somehow managing to furrow slightly. "Honey, we've been thinking. You're 25 years old. It's time you started thinking about your future more seriously." "I am thinking about my future. I love what I do." Madison let out a laugh that sounded more like a snort. "Love doesn't pay the bills, Eliana. You're living in this house, eating our food, using our resources, all while playing charity worker for pennies. Our food, our resources." Even though my father had built this empire from nothing, even though half of everything in this house had been purchased with money from Wright Industries, the company my mother had helped him establish, Madison talked like I was some kind of freeloader. "I pay rent," I said quietly. $300 a month, Caroline scoffed. "Do you know what a house like this would rent for on the open market? $20,000 minimum. You're essentially living here, for free." I wanted to point out that this was my childhood home, that I'd grown up in these rooms, that my mother's picture still hung in the upstairs hallway despite Caroline's attempts to redecorate her out of existence. But I'd learned years ago that logic didn't work with these two. "What exactly are you suggesting?" I asked. Madison perked up, clearly excited to deliver whatever blow they'd planned. "Well, since you insist on working at that little charity, we think you should move out and support yourself completely. No more family money, no more living here, no more safety net." "Madison's right," Caroline added. "It's time for some tough love. If you want to play poor, you should actually experience what it's like. The irony was suffocating. They had no idea what it was like to worry about money, to count every dollar, to choose between groceries and gas. I'd been managing my own expenses since college, working multiple jobs to avoid asking them for anything. The only reason I paid the token rent was because Caroline had insisted on it, claiming it would teach me responsibility. Fine, I said, surprising them both. I'll move out. Madison's perfectly sculpted eyebrows shot up. Really? Just like that? Just like that. Caroline looked almost disappointed, like she'd been hoping for a fight. Well, good. We'll give you 30 days to find a place. I'll be out by the weekend. I turned to leave, but Madison's voice stopped me. Oh, and Eliana? You might want to invest in a real watch once you're supporting yourself. That fake thing you wear is getting embarrassing. I looked down at my wrist, at the watch my mother had given me on my 16th birthday. She'd told me it was special, that it had been her grandmother's, passed down through generations of strong women in our family. Madison had no idea what it meant to me, no understanding of its sentimental value. It's not fake, I said softly. Madison burst into laughter, the sound sharp and cruel. Please, look at it, Eliana. It's obviously some cheap knockoff. The face is all worn, the band is practically falling apart, and I've never seen you get it serviced or anything. Real luxury watches require maintenance. Just because something looks old doesn't mean it's fake. Caroline joined in Madison's amusement. Sweetheart, we know quality when we see it. Madison has a collection of authentic timepieces. That little thing you wear probably came from a street vendor somewhere. I felt heat rising in my cheeks, not from embarrassment but from anger. They were mocking something precious to me, something that connected me to my mother and my family's history, but arguing would only make it worse. Whatever you say, I murmured, starting toward the door again. Actually, Madison called out, her voice taking on a particularly nasty edge. Why don't you just throw that thing away? It's really bringing down the family image. What if someone sees you wearing it and thinks we can't afford to buy you a real watch? I'm not throwing away my mother's watch. Your mother's watch? Caroline's voice turned icy. Your mother didn't have expensive jewelry, Eliana. She was a simple woman with simple tastes. Everything valuable in this house came after I arrived. The casual dismissal of my mother, the woman who had built Wright Industries alongside my father, who had been the creative force behind their most successful campaigns, who had died in a car accident when I was 15. It was too much. You don't know anything about my mother, I said, my voice shaking with suppressed emotion. Madison stood up from her chair, walking over to where I stood. She was taller than me in her designer heels, and she used every inch of that height to look down at me with disdain. I know she didn't leave you a $3 million watch because she didn't have one. That thing is a fake, Eliana, just like your pretend job and your pretend independence. Before I could react, Madison reached out and grabbed my wrist, trying to unclasp the watch. I jerked away, but she was surprisingly strong, and the clasp, worn from years of daily wear, gave way. Madison, stop. But she was already walking toward the trash bin in the corner of the kitchen, my mother's watch dangling from her fingers like a piece of garbage. This is for your own good, she said with fake concern. You need to stop living in fantasies. The watch disappeared into the bin with a soft thud, landing among coffee grounds and breakfast scraps. I stared at the spot where it had vanished, feeling like a part of my soul had been ripped away. There, Madison said, dusting her hands off theatrically. Now you can get a real watch, maybe something from Target that fits your budget. Caroline nodded approvingly. Sometimes we have to be cruel to be kind, Eliana. This is a learning moment. I couldn't speak. I couldn't move. I just stared at that trash bin, knowing that retrieving my mother's watch would mean digging through garbage while they watched and laughed. The kitchen door swung open, and Marcus, our longtime security chief, walked in. He was a man in his 60s who'd worked for the Wright family since before I was born, one of the few people in this house who remembered my mother with genuine fondness. "Good morning, ladies," he said politely, then noticed my face. "Everything all right, Miss Wright?" "Everything's fine, Marcus," Caroline said quickly. "Just having a family discussion." But Marcus was looking at me, concern evident in his weathered features. His eyes moved to the trash bin, then back to my wrist, where the pale band of skin showed where my watch had been. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now back to where we left off. "Miss Wright," he said carefully, "wasn't that your mother's watch you were wearing?" Madison rolled her eyes. "Marcus, that thing was a fake. We were just helping Eliana face reality." Something shifted in Marcus's expression. He walked over to the trash bin and peered inside, then looked back at Madison with an expression I'd never seen on his face before. "Ma'am," he said slowly, "that's a Patek Philippe." "A what?" Madison asked, her confident smirk faltering slightly. "A Patek Philippe. Specifically, it looks like a vintage Calatrava from the 1950s. If it's authentic?" He paused, calculating. "Ma'am, that's a $3 million watch." The silence that followed was deafening. Caroline's face went white. Madison's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. "That's impossible," Caroline whispered. Marcus shook his head gravely. "Mrs. Eleanor Wright, God rest her soul, came from old money, real old money. Her family collected vintage timepieces for generations. I remember when she wore that watch to charity galas. It was always her favorite piece. I found my voice at last, though it came out as barely a whisper. My mother told me it was special." Madison was staring at the trash bin like it contained a live bomb. $3 million? Give or take, Marcus confirmed. Those vintage Patek Philippes, especially. Ones with that kind of provenance, they're worth more than most people's houses. The weight of what had just happened settled over the room like a suffocating blanket. Madison had just thrown away a watch worth more than some people made in a lifetime. A watch that had belonged to my mother, my grandmother, and generations of women before them. But more than that, she'd revealed something about herself and Caroline that couldn't be taken back. They'd been so certain of my worthlessness, so convinced that nothing associated with me could have value, that they'd never bothered to consider they might be wrong. "Well," I said finally, my voice steadier than I felt, "I guess I know what you really think of my mother's memory." And with that, I walked out of the kitchen, leaving them to contemplate the $3 million mistake they'd just made. The silence in the Wright Industries boardroom was suffocating. I sat across from my father, Richard Wright, watching him process what Marcus had just told him over the phone. His face had gone through several color changes in the past 5 minutes, from his usual healthy tan to pale gray to an alarming shade of red. "You're telling me," he said slowly, setting his phone down with deliberate precision, "that Caroline and Madison threw Eleanor's Patek Philippe in the trash." I nodded, still feeling numb from the morning's events. Marcus fished it out. "It's safe now, but Dad, they had no idea what it was. They were so convinced I was worthless that they never considered $3 million. He ran his hands through his graying hair, a gesture I remembered from my childhood whenever he was particularly stressed. "Eleanor's grandmother's watch, the one that survived the Titanic." "What?" My father looked up at me, his eyes distant with memory. "Your great-great-grandmother was supposed to board the Titanic, but she got sick at the last minute, stayed in Southampton an extra week. That watch was already on her wrist. She never took it off. Eleanor used to say it was the family's lucky charm." I felt a chill run down my spine. The watch hadn't just been expensive, it was a piece of history, a survivor of one of the most famous disasters in human history. and Madison had thrown it away like garbage. "Dad, there's something else," I said carefully. "Caroline said Mom never had expensive jewelry. She said everything valuable in the house came after she arrived." My father's expression darkened. "Caroline said what?" "She dismissed Mom completely. Said she was just a simple woman with simple tastes." The change in my father was immediate and dramatic. The businessman facade dropped away, revealing a depth of anger I'd rarely seen from him. He stood up abruptly, pacing to the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked downtown Los Angeles. "Your mother," he said quietly, "came from more money than Caroline could spend in 3 lifetimes. The Ashworth family built half of Boston's financial district. Eleanor could have bought and sold Caroline's entire family history with her trust fund alone." This was news to me. "Then why did we never—" "Because your mother hated that world. She saw what money without purpose could do to people, how it could corrupt and destroy families. She wanted to earn her own way, build something meaningful." He turned back to face me. "Right Industries exists because of your mother's vision and her family's initial investment. Caroline knows this." The implications hit me like a physical blow. Caroline hadn't just been dismissive about my mother's jewelry. She'd been deliberately rewriting history, making sure I never knew the truth about my own family's legacy. "How much of Mom's family money went into the company?" I asked. 60% of the startup capital, plus her business connections, her marketing genius, her networks in Boston and New York. My father's voice was gaining strength, as if remembering these facts was awakening something that had been dormant. "Caroline has been living off your mother's investments for 6 years. The office door burst open without warning. Caroline strode in, her face flushed with what looked like panic, Madison trailing behind her. They'd clearly driven straight from the house to the Right Industries building downtown. "Richard, we need to talk," Caroline announced, not acknowledging my presence. "There's been a misunderstanding about some old jewelry. My father didn't invite them to sit." "A misunderstanding?" Madison stepped forward. Her earlier confidence completely evaporated. "Daddy, we didn't know about the watch. It looked so old and worn. And Eliana never said—" "Never said what?" My father's voice was dangerously quiet. "That she was wearing a family heirloom worth more than most people's houses? Should she have announced it every morning at breakfast?" Caroline moved closer to his desk, her tone shifting to the manipulative sweetness I knew so well. "Honey, you're upset, and I understand that. But we need to think about this rationally. That watch has been sitting in a jewelry box for years. If it's really worth that much money, maybe we should consider—" "It wasn't sitting in a jewelry box," I interrupted, finding my voice. "I've worn it every day for 5 years. You've seen it on my wrist hundreds of times." "Well, yes, but you assumed it was worthless because it was mine." The words came out stronger than I felt. "Just like you assume everything about me is worthless." Madison's face twisted with frustration. "That's not fair, Eliana. We were trying to help you. You can't blame us for not recognizing some ancient watches." "Ancient?" My father's voice could have cut steel. "Madison, that watch is older than this company. It's older than this building. It represents 5 generations of successful women who built empires and survived disasters." Caroline tried a different approach, moving to place her hand on my father's arm. "Richard, sweetheart, maybe this is actually a blessing in disguise. If that watch is really worth $3 million, we could use the money for Madison's wedding. Or that house in Aspen we've been looking at." My father stepped away from her touch like she'd struck him. "Use the money? Caroline, that watch isn't mine to sell. It belongs to Eliana, just like it belonged to Eleanor and her mother before her. But you're her father. Surely you have some say." "None whatsoever." He walked back to his desk and picked up a folder I hadn't noticed before. "Which brings me to something else we need to discuss." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Caroline and Madison exchanged glances, and I could see the first hints of real fear creeping into their expressions. When Eleanor died, my father continued, opening the folder, she left very specific instructions about her estate. I've been managing Eliana's inheritance in a trust fund, waiting until she turned 25 to transfer full control. My 25th birthday was 3 months ago. The significance wasn't lost on anyone in the room. What inheritance? Caroline asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Eleanor's share of Wright Industries, her family trust fund, her real estate, portfolio, her art collection. My father pulled out document after document. Caroline, you've been living in a house that belongs to my daughter. You've been spending money that belongs to my daughter. You've been treating the rightful heir to the right fortune like a charity case. I felt the world spinning around me. Dad, I don't understand. You never said anything about, because your mother made me promise to let you find your own path first. She wanted you to discover who you were without the burden of extreme wealth hanging over your head. She said if you were still doing meaningful work and living modestly by 25, then you'd proven you could handle the responsibility. Madison sank into one of the chairs, her face white as paper. How much money are we talking about? My father consulted the documents. The trust fund alone is worth $47 million. The Wright Industries shares would give Eliana controlling interest in a company valued at over $200 million. The real estate portfolio, including the Beverly Hills house, the Malibu Beach house, and the properties in Boston and New York, is worth another $60 million. The silence that followed was deafening. I couldn't process the numbers he was throwing around. 3 hours ago, I'd been worried about finding an apartment I could afford on my nonprofit salary. Now, I was apparently worth more than most small countries' GDP. Caroline was the first to find her voice. But the house, we renovated. We invested our own money. You invested money that was already Eliana's, my father corrected. Every dollar that's gone into that house for the past 6 years has come from Eleanor's estate. Your personal accounts have never funded anything significant. This is ridiculous, Madison snapped, some of her old arrogance returning. Eliana doesn't know anything about business or managing money. She works at a charity. You can't just hand her a fortune. My father's smile was sharp and cold. Actually, I can, and I am. Eliana, as of today, you own 62% of Wright Industries. You own the house Caroline's been treating as her personal kingdom. You control investments and properties worth over $300 million. I looked around the room, at these people who had spent years making me feel small and insignificant. Caroline, who had erased my mother's memory at every opportunity. Madison, who had mocked my work, my clothes, my life choices, and this morning had thrown away a priceless family heirloom. There's one more thing, my father continued, and I could hear satisfaction creeping into his voice. Eleanor's will contained a specific clause about the house. If anyone in the family ever deliberately destroyed or discarded her personal belongings, they would forfeit their right to live there. Caroline's face went ashen. Richard, you can't be serious. Marcus witnessed the entire incident this morning. He's prepared to testify that Madison knowingly threw Eleanor's watch in the trash, despite Eliana's protests. Caroline, you encouraged and supported this action. Madison jumped to her feet. That's not how it happened. We thought it was fake. The intent doesn't matter, my father said calmly. The action does. You destroyed what you believed to be Eliana's personal property out of spite and cruelty. The fact that it turned out to be worth $3 million just makes it worse. I found myself standing, though I didn't remember deciding to do so. The weight of everything I'd learned was settling on my shoulders. But instead of feeling crushed, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Power. Caroline, I said, my voice steady and clear. You have 30 days to find somewhere else to live. Her mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. Madison, I continued. Your Tesla, your credit cards, your shopping allowances, all of that was coming from my inheritance. As of today, it stops. You can't do this, Madison whispered. We're family. I thought about all the mornings I'd been made to feel unwelcome in my own home. All the times they'd dismissed my work, my choices, my mother's memory. All the years they'd convinced me I was a poor relation, dependent on their charity. Family, I repeated slowly. Is that what you call what happened this morning? When you threw my mother's watch in the trash and laughed about it? Neither of them had an answer for that. My father closed the folder and looked at Caroline with an expression of complete disappointment. I should have done this years ago. Eleanor trusted me to protect Eliana and honor her memory. I've failed at both. Richard, please, Caroline tried one last time. We can work this out. We're married. We have a life together. He shook his head slowly. Caroline, for 6 years you've made my daughter feel like a stranger in her own home. You've spent her inheritance while convincing her she was a burden. You've systematically tried to erase every trace of the woman I loved most in this world. He paused, meeting her eyes directly. I want a divorce. The words hung in the air like a bomb that had just detonated. Caroline staggered backward, reaching for Madison's arm for support. I'll be staying at the downtown penthouse until you're both moved out, my father continued. Eliana, the house is yours. Do with it whatever you think your mother would have wanted. As I watched Caroline and Madison leave the office, Caroline in tears, Madison in shock, I realized that in the span of a few hours, my entire world had shifted. The people who had spent years making me feel powerless had just discovered they never had any power at all. But the strangest part was that I didn't feel vindicated or satisfied. I just felt tired and sad and overwhelmed by the magnitude of what I'd lost and gained in a single morning. The watch was safe. My inheritance was secure. But somehow, sitting in that boardroom surrounded by documents worth hundreds of millions of dollars, I felt more alone than I ever had before. The Hope Harbor Community Center had never felt smaller than it did that Wednesday morning. I sat in my cramped office, staring at the stack of financial documents my father's lawyer had delivered the night before. $300 million. The number still didn't feel real, even printed in official legal terminology across dozens of pages. My phone buzzed constantly with calls from reporters, financial advisors, and people I'd never heard of who somehow knew about my inheritance. Word traveled fast in Los Angeles when old money shifted hands, especially when it involved the Wright family. Knock, knock, came a familiar voice from my doorway. Tyler Santos, my colleague and the closest thing I had to a best friend, stood. They're holding 2 cups of coffee and wearing his usual concerned expression. Figured you might need some caffeine to deal with whatever storm is brewing. Tyler had been working at Hope Harbor for 3 years, ever since he'd graduated from UCLA. With a master's in social work, he was one of the few people who'd never treated me differently because of my last name. Probably because he'd grown up in East LA and wasn't impressed by Beverly Hills drama. You could say that, I muttered, accepting the coffee gratefully. Have you been online today? I try to avoid the internet before noon. Keeps me sane. He settled into the folding chair across from my desk, which was really just a table we'd found at a garage sale. But judging by the news vans I saw parked outside, I'm guessing your family situation made headlines. I laughed, but there was no humor in it. Tyler, what would you do if you suddenly inherited more money than you could spend in 10 lifetimes? He raised an eyebrow. That's oddly specific. Should I be worried about you? Before I could answer, my phone rang. The caller, ID showed a number I'd been avoiding all morning. Madison. Against my better judgment, I answered. What do you want, Madison? Eliana? Thank God. Listen, we need to talk. This whole situation has gotten out of hand. Her voice was different, smaller, less confident than I'd ever heard it. Can you meet me somewhere private? Please? I looked at Tyler, who was pretending. not to listen while obviously hearing every word. I don't think we have anything to discuss. We have everything to discuss. Eliana, I know you're angry, but you have to understand. We had no idea about the money. If we'd known, things would have been different. Would they have been? I asked. Would you have treated me better if you'd known I was worth more than you? Because that's not exactly the character reference you think it is. There was silence on the other end, then what sounded like sniffling. I messed up. We both did. But Eliana, I'm your sister. Doesn't that count for something? The word sister hit harder than I expected. Despite everything that had happened, despite years of cruelty and dismissal, there was still a part of me that remembered the Madison who used to sneak into my room during thunderstorms when we were younger. Fine, I said finally. One conversation, neutral ground, the coffee bean on Wilshire, 1 hour. Thank you. Eliana, really, thank you. I hung up and found Tyler staring at me with a mixture of concern and curiosity. Want to explain what's happening? He asked gently. Because yesterday you were worried about making rent, and today you're getting calls from sisters who apparently need to discuss money. So I told him everything. About the watch, about the inheritance, about my mother's hidden fortune, and my father's divorce. Tyler listened without interruption, his expression growing more incredulous with each detail. When I finished, he sat back in his chair and whistled low. $300 million. Give or take. And your stepfamily had. No idea? None. They thought they were the wealthy ones supporting poor little me. Tyler was quiet for a long moment, processing. Eliana, what are you going to do? It was the question I'd been avoiding since yesterday. I don't know. I never wanted this kind of money. I chose to work here because I believe in what we do, not because I was waiting for a trust fund to kick in. But think about what you could do with that kind of resource, Tyler said, leaning forward with sudden excitement. We could expand the program, open centers in other neighborhoods, fund college scholarships, create job training programs. We could change thousands of lives. His enthusiasm was infectious, but it also scared me. What if I mess it up? What if I become like them, like Caroline and Madison? Have you looked around this office lately? Tyler gestured at our secondhand furniture and peeling paint. You've had access to your father's money your whole life, and you chose to work in a converted warehouse helping kids from rough neighborhoods. I don't think you're in danger of becoming shallow. An hour later, I sat across from Madison at a corner, table in the coffee bean, watching her stir her latte with nervous energy. She looked different, smaller somehow, and definitely less polished. Her usual perfect makeup was absent, and she was wearing jeans and a simple sweater I'd never seen before. Thank you for coming, she said, not meeting my eyes. I wasn't sure you would. I almost didn't. She nodded, accepting that. Eliana, I need you to know that I'm sorry. Really, genuinely sorry. Not just about the watch, but about everything. The way we treated you, the things we said about Mom, it was wrong. I waited, saying nothing. I know this sounds terrible, but I didn't know. About the money, about Mom's family, about any of it. Caroline always told me that Dad married down, that Mom was lucky to land someone like him. I believed her. Why? I asked. Why did you want to believe that my mother was somehow less than Caroline? Madison's face crumpled slightly. Because if your mom was amazing and successful and wealthy, what did that make mine? Caroline was always so insecure about being wife number 2. She needed Mom to be ordinary so she could feel special. It was the most honest thing Madison had ever said to me. And you went along with it. I was 13 when Caroline and Dad got married. She spent 6 years convincing me that we were the real family, that you were just an obligation Dad felt guilty about. I'm not saying that excuses anything, but... She paused, wiping her eyes with her napkin. I think I was jealous of you. Jealous? Of me? I couldn't hide my disbelief. Madison, you had everything. Designer clothes, fancy cars, Dad's attention. I had things, she interrupted. You had legitimacy. You belonged in that house in ways I never could. Your pictures were on the walls. Your memories were in every room. Caroline could redecorate all she wanted, but she couldn't erase the fact that you were there first. The conversation was taking turns I hadn't expected. I'd come here prepared for manipulation or demands, not vulnerability. What do you want from me, Madison? She took a shaky breath. I want to earn forgiveness. I know I can't undo what I did, but I want to try to make it right. Caroline and we have to move out by the end of the month. Dad's cutting us off completely. Caroline's freaking out, but maybe this is what I need. A chance to figure out who I am without all the money and status. Where will you go? I have a friend from college who lives in a studio apartment in Koreatown. She said I could sleep on her couch until I find a job. Madison laughed bitterly. I've never had a real job. I don't even know how to write a resume. Despite everything, I felt a pang of sympathy. Madison was 23 years old and had never been responsible for anything in her life. The real world was going to hit her like a freight train. What about Caroline? She's hiring lawyers, trying to contest the divorce settlement and your inheritance. She's convinced there's some way to fight this. Madison shook her head. She doesn't understand that Dad isn't angry about the money. He's angry about how we treated you. We sat in silence for a few minutes, both lost in our own thoughts. Finally, Madison spoke again. Eliana, I know I have no right to ask this, but would you consider helping me understand something? What? How to be a decent person. You've always been kind, even when we didn't deserve it. You chose meaningful work over money. You took care of that watch like it was the most precious thing in the world, and it turned out it was. She met my eyes for the first time since we'd sat down. I want to learn how to be someone I can respect. The request caught me completely off guard. Madison, I can't teach you how to be a good person. That's something you have to figure out yourself. But maybe you could give me a chance to try? I know I don't deserve it, but what if I volunteered at your community center? Not for publicity or to make myself feel better, but to actually help. I studied her face, looking for signs of manipulation or hidden agenda. All I saw was exhaustion and what might have been genuine remorse. Tyler would never let you near the kids after everything that's happened, I said finally. Then let me start somewhere else. Let me prove I'm serious about changing. My phone buzzed with another call from an unknown number. The media attention wasn't going to die down anytime soon, and I realized I needed to make some decisions about my future quickly. Madison, I need time to think about everything. This conversation, the inheritance, what I want to do next. It's all happening too fast. She nodded eagerly. Of course. Take all the time you need. Just, please don't write me off completely. I know I've been terrible, but I want to do better. As I walked back to my car, I found myself thinking about Tyler's words earlier with $300 million. I could transform Hope Harbor into something extraordinary. I could create programs that actually changed lives instead of just providing temporary help. But I also thought about Madison's request for a second chance, and about Caroline's lawyers trying to contest my inheritance. The money came with complications I'd never anticipated. My phone rang again. This time it was my father. Eliana, we need to talk. Caroline's legal team is making moves, and there are some things about your mother's estate you need to know. Things that make what happened yesterday look simple. I looked back at the coffee shop where Madison was still sitting, staring out the window with a lost expression. Then I thought about the mountain of legal documents waiting on my desk, the reporters camped outside Hope Harbor, and the weight of decisions that would affect not just my life, but the lives of everyone around me. I'll be right there, I told my father. Whatever came next, I had a feeling the real challenges were just beginning. The Wright Industries archive room hadn't been opened in 6 years. Dust particles danced in the afternoon sunlight streaming through the small windows as my father led me past rows of filing cabinets and storage boxes. The air smelled of old paper and forgotten memories. Your mother insisted on keeping physical copies of everything, he explained, pulling a key from his pocket. She said digital files could be deleted or hacked, but paper leaves a trail that's harder to erase. We stopped in front of a climate-controlled vault I'd never known existed. Inside were dozens of safety deposit boxes, each labeled with dates, spanning back to the 1980s. My father opened one marked Eleanor Ashworth Wright, Personal Correspondence 1995-2010. Eliana, what I'm about to show you changes everything we thought we knew about your mother's death. My blood went cold. What do you mean? He pulled out a thick manila folder and handed it to me. Your mother didn't just die in a car accident. She was investigating something when it happened. Something involving Caroline's family. I opened the folder with trembling hands. Inside were dozens of documents, bank statements, insurance records, private investigator reports, and photographs. But what caught my attention immediately was my mother's handwriting on a legal pad. Notes dated just 2 weeks before her death. Caroline Blackwood, financial inconsistencies, I read aloud. Inheritance claims don't match probate records. Mother's estate. Where did $12 million go? My father nodded grimly. Caroline claimed her mother left her a substantial inheritance when she died in 2009. But your mother discovered that Caroline's mother, Margaret Blackwood, had actually died broke. Massive gambling debts, foreclosed properties, the works. I flipped through more pages, finding bank transfer records and photocopies of legal documents. So where did Caroline's money come from? That's what Eleanor was trying to figure out when she died. Look at this. He pointed to a photograph tucked between the pages. It showed Caroline leaving a downtown office building, taken from across the street with a telephoto lens. She was meeting regularly with someone named Vincent. Moreau. Ring any bells? The name meant nothing to me, but my father's expression suggested it should have. Vincent Moreau was a con artist who specialized in targeting wealthy widowers. He'd find women to seduce them, marry them, then slowly drain their assets. Eleanor suspected Caroline was working with him. The implications hit me like a physical blow. You think Caroline married you as part of a con? I think Caroline was supposed to drain our accounts and disappear. But she got greedy when she realized how much money your mother's family had. She decided to stay and try to get everything. I stared at the documents, my mind racing. Dad, if this is true, why didn't you investigate after Mom died? His face aged 10 years in an instant. Because I was destroyed. Losing Eleanor broke something in me, and Caroline was there, offering comfort, helping with you in the business. I was so grateful for the support that I ignored the warning signs. A new folder caught my eye, this one labeled Margaret Blackwood, Death Investigation. Inside were newspaper clippings about a suspicious house fire that had killed Caroline's mother, along with insurance payout records. Eleanor thought Margaret Blackwood's death wasn't accidental either, my father continued. The fire started in the middle of the night, all the smoke detectors had dead batteries, and Caroline collected a $2 million insurance payout within weeks. You're saying Caroline killed her own mother? I'm saying your mother suspected it. And 3 days after Eleanor shared these suspicions with Caroline directly, your mother's car went off the Pacific Coast Highway. The room seemed to spin around me. I gripped the edge of a filing cabinet for support. The accident, brake failure. The mechanic said it looked like the brake lines had been tampered with, but the insurance company ruled it accidental. There wasn't enough evidence for the police to pursue it. I sank into a nearby chair, overwhelmed by the weight of what I was learning. Why are you telling me this now? Because Caroline's lawyers aren't just contesting your inheritance. They're claiming Eleanor was mentally unstable at the time of her death, that her will should be invalidated. They're going to use these investigation files as evidence that she was paranoid and delusional. My phone rang, interrupting the bombshell revelation. The caller ID showed Marcus's number. "Miss Wright," his voice was urgent when I answered. "You need to get to the house immediately. Caroline and Madison are here with a moving truck, and they're taking things that don't belong to them." "What kind of things?" "Art, jewelry, furniture from your mother's room?" "They claim they have a court order, but something doesn't feel right." My father and I exchanged glances. "We'll be there in 20 minutes, I told Marcus. The drive to Beverly Hills felt endless. My father filled in more details about my mother's investigation, each revelation more disturbing than the last. Caroline had apparently been siphoning money from Wright Industries for years, creating fake vendor accounts and inflated expense reports. She was smart about it, he admitted. Never took enough to trigger audits, always had plausible explanations. Your mother only caught it because she was looking for patterns related to the Vincent Moreau connection. When we pulled into the circular driveway, I could see Marcus arguing with two men in suits next to a large moving truck. Caroline was directing workers who were carrying what looked like my mother's jewelry box and several paintings from the upstairs hallway. "Stop," I called out, jumping from the car before it fully stopped. "Those are my mother's things." One of the men in suits stepped forward, pulling out an official-looking document. "Ma'am, we have a temporary restraining order allowing Mrs. Caroline Wright to remove her personal property from the premises." I scanned the paper quickly. It was signed by a judge I'd never heard of and dated this morning. "These aren't her personal belongings. These are family heirlooms." Caroline appeared in the doorway, wearing a satisfied smirk I recognized from years of smaller victories. "Eliana, honey, I know this is difficult, but legally I'm entitled to remove anything I brought into this marriage. You didn't bring my mother's jewelry into this marriage. She died years before you even met my father." "Actually," Caroline pulled out her own set of documents, "I can prove that several of these pieces were gifts from Richard during our marriage. I have receipts and insurance records." My father stepped up beside me, his face thunderous. "Caroline, I never gave you Eleanor's jewelry. You know that." "Memory can be tricky when you're upset, darling, but paperwork doesn't lie." I watched in growing horror as the workers loaded box after box into the truck. Photo albums, decorative, items from my mother's desk, even the throw blanket she used to wrap around herself while reading in her favorite chair. "This is theft," I said, pulling out my phone. "I'm calling the police." Caroline's lawyer, because of course she'd brought a lawyer, stepped forward smoothly. "Miss Wright, I understand your emotional attachment to these items, but our client has documentation proving ownership. If you'd like to dispute that, you'll need to file a counterclaim and wait for a hearing. How long would that take?" "Several months, possibly longer given the complexity of the estate. Several months during which Caroline would have possession of my mother's things." I could see the calculation in Caroline's eyes. She was betting. I'd eventually pay her to get them back, rather than fight a lengthy legal battle. Madison appeared from inside the house, carrying what I recognized as my mother's recipe box. Our eyes met across the driveway, and I saw something I hadn't expected. Shame. "Madison, don't," I said quietly. "Please. That was Mom's recipe box. She wrote notes in the margins about cooking for me when I was sick." Madison stopped walking, clutching the box uncertainly. "Caroline said these were just old papers." "They're love letters to my daughter," my father said, his voice breaking slightly. "Eleanor wrote notes about every meal she made for Eliana, every birthday cake, every holiday tradition she wanted to pass down." For a moment, Madison looked like she might put the box down, but Caroline's sharp voice cut through the air. "Madison, bring that to the truck. Now, we don't have time for sentimentality." I watched my mother's memories disappear into the moving truck, feeling helpless and furious in equal measure. But as the workers loaded the last boxes, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. One of the men wasn't a mover at all. He was photographing the inside of our house with a professional camera, documenting room layouts, security systems, and valuables that were staying behind. "Dad," I whispered, pointing out the photographer, "that's not about moving belongings." My father followed my gaze and immediately understood. "They're casing the house for a break-in." Caroline was planning something bigger than just taking my mother's jewelry. She was planning to rob us blind, probably during some upcoming event when she knew we'd be away from the house. But I had one advantage Caroline didn't know about yet. Hidden in my mother's investigation files was evidence of every crime Caroline had ever committed, including her connection to Vincent Moreau and the suspicious circumstances around her mother's death. As the moving truck pulled away with 6 years' worth of my mother's memory, I made a decision. Caroline wanted to play dirty? Fine. But she was about to discover that Eleanor Ashworth Wright had raised her daughter to be smarter than anyone gave her credit for. "Marcus," I called our security chief, who was still watching the truck disappear, down the street. "I need you to install new security cameras throughout the house, hidden ones. And I need you to call that private investigator Mom used to work with." "Miss Wright?" "Caroline just made her biggest mistake. She's shown me exactly what she's planning to do." I looked at my father, who was staring at the house like he was seeing it for the first time. "And now we're going to catch her in the act. War for my inheritance was just beginning, but Caroline had underestimated one crucial thing. I wasn't just fighting for money anymore. I was fighting for justice for my mother, and I had $300 million worth of resources to make sure I won. 3 weeks later, I sat in an unmarked surveillance van parked 2 blocks from my own house, watching multiple screens that showed every angle of the Wright estate. Detective Sarah Chen of the LAPD Financial Crimes Unit adjusted her headphones and nodded at her partner. "Target vehicle approaching from the east," Detective Rodriguez murmured into his radio. "Black, SUV, license plate matches the one from the Marina incident." The Marina incident had been our first breakthrough. Using my mother's private investigator contacts, we'd discovered that Vincent Moreau was very much alive and had been meeting Caroline at various locations around Los Angeles for the past month. Apparently, their original plan to disappear with my father's money had evolved into something much more ambitious. "There's Madison," I said, pointing to one of the screens. She was walking across the front yard toward the main entrance, but something was different about her. Gone were the designer clothes and confident stride. She moved hesitantly, constantly looking over her shoulder. Detective Chen frowned. "That's not the behavior we expected based on your briefings. She looks terrified." She was right. Madison looked like someone being forced to do something against her will, not someone participating in a planned robbery. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Madison is not safe. Caroline discovered she's been talking to you. VMP. Vincent." Moreau was warning me about Madison. "We need to abort," I said immediately. "Something's wrong." But Detective Rodriguez was already speaking into his radio. "All units, we have civilians in danger. Madison Wright appears to be under duress." On the screens, we watched Madison approach the front door. Instead of using a key or security code, she knocked. 3 short taps, 2 long ones, then 3 short again. It was Morse code for SOS. "Chen, get the tactical team moving now," Rodriguez ordered. "This isn't a robbery anymore." My phone rang. Madison's number. "Eliana?" Her voice was barely a whisper, and I could hear she was crying. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Caroline has pictures of me with drugs, fake evidence that I've been stealing from Dad's accounts. She says if I don't help her tonight, she'll destroy my life." "Madison, where is Caroline right now?" "She's in the house already. She got in through the servants' entrance using codes she copied months ago." "Eliana, she has a gun. And there's someone with her. Some man I've never seen before. Vincent Moreau." This wasn't about stealing jewelry anymore. This was about eliminating witnesses. Madison, listen to me carefully. Do exactly what I tell you. Walk to the front garden, by the fountain. The police are already moving in. Police? Her voice rose in panic. Eliana, if Caroline sees police cars, she said she'll— The line went dead. On the surveillance screens, we could see Madison standing frozen by the front door. Then, from the second-floor window, a figure appeared. Caroline, pointing what was clearly a handgun down at Madison. Chen, we need that tactical team now, I shouted, but she was already coordinating with multiple units. My phone buzzed again. This time it was a call from the house's landline. Caroline was calling from inside. Hello, Eliana dear. Caroline's voice was sickeningly sweet. I think it's time we had a chat about your inheritance. Caroline, let Madison go. She's not part of this. Oh, but she is. Madison's been such a helpful little pawn. Did you know she's been reporting back to me about every conversation you two have had? Every coffee shop meeting, every tender moment of sisterly bonding. My heart sank. Madison's apparent remorse, her request to volunteer at Hope Harbor, her vulnerability about learning to be a better person, it had all been an act. But here's the thing, Caroline continued. Madison got cold feet, started actually caring about you. Can you imagine? So now I have to clean up loose ends. What do you want, Caroline? I want you to come inside, alone. No police, no security, no daddy to rescue you. Just you, me, and a conversation about how you're going to sign over your inheritance to avoid any more accidents. I'm not going to— Look at the south window, dear. I turned to the screen showing that angle of the house. Madison was now visible inside, tied to a chair, with Caroline holding the gun to her head. Even if Madison had been feeding Caroline information, she was still my sister. She was still just a 23-year-old who'd been manipulated by a master criminal. You have 10 minutes, Caroline said. Come alone, or Madison joins your mother in the afterlife. The line went dead. Detective Chen grabbed my arm as I started to stand. Absolutely not. We have trained negotiators, tactical teams. She'll kill Madison the second she sees a SWAT team. Caroline's not bluffing. She's already killed at least 2 people. Which is exactly why we're not sending a civilian into that house. My phone buzzed with another text, this time from Marcus. Hidden passage from wine cellar to second floor. Eleanor showed me years ago. Can get you inside unseen. I looked at the detectives, then at the screens showing Madison's terrified face. What if I went in, but not alone? What if I had backup she couldn't see? 20 minutes later, I was crawling through a narrow passage that ran behind the walls of our house. My mother had apparently insisted on multiple escape routes when the house was built, paranoid about home invasions even back then. Now I understand why. Detective Chen's voice crackled through my nearly invisible earpiece. You're approaching the second floor. Heat sensors show 3 people in the master bedroom. Caroline, Madison, and an unknown male. Vincent Moreau was still with her. This was definitely a planned execution, not just a robbery gone wrong. I reached the hidden panel behind my father's study and carefully opened a crack. The room was empty, but I could hear voices from the hallway. Told you she'd come? Caroline was saying. Eliana's always been predictable, too noble for her own good, just like her mother. The plan was to make it look like a robbery, a man's voice replied, Vincent Moreau. This is getting too complicated. The plan changed when she inherited $300 million. We're not settling for pocket change anymore. I crept along the hallway toward the master bedroom, staying low and quiet. Through my earpiece, Detective Chen provided updates on the tactical team's positions around the house. Eliana? Caroline called out. I know you're here somewhere. The front door sensor showed someone entering 5 minutes ago. I reached the bedroom doorway and peered around the corner. Madison was tied to a chair in the center of the room, tears streaming down her face. Caroline stood behind her with the gun, while Vincent Moreau kept watch at the window. Caroline, I called out, stepping into view with my hands raised. I'm here. Let Madison go. Caroline's face lit up with triumph. There's my dear stepdaughter. Vincent, this is the little problem we've been discussing. Vincent Moreau turned around, and I got my first good look at him. He was younger than I'd expected, probably in his 40s, with the kind of smooth, handsome features that would appeal to lonely widows. But his eyes were cold and calculating. She looks like her mother, he observed. Eleanor was beautiful too. Shame she had to be so nosy. You killed my mother. Vincent doesn't like that word, Caroline said pleasantly. He prefers problem-solving. Eleanor was going to expose our arrangement. We simply solved the problem. By cutting her brake lines, Caroline shrugged. Traffic accidents happen all the time in Los Angeles. Very sad, very believable. Madison made a muffled sound through her gag, and I could see fresh bruises on her arms. Whatever Caroline had done to convince her to cooperate, it hadn't been gentle. What now? I asked. You kill us both and claim we were victims of a home invasion? Oh, much more creative than that, Vincent said, pulling out his own gun. Madison's been struggling with depression and drug addiction. We have documentation to prove it. Tonight, in a fit of despair over losing her inheritance, she attacked her stepsister. Tragic family violence. I'll be forced to defend myself, but sadly, not in time to save either of you. And Caroline? Caroline will be the traumatized survivor who witnessed the whole terrible event. She'll inherit everything as the grieving widow, and will disappear to a non-extradition country within the week. It was a solid plan, I had to admit, except for one thing they hadn't counted on. The only problem, I said, reaching slowly into my jacket pocket, is that this entire conversation has been broadcast live to the LAPD tactical team outside. Caroline's face went white. That's impossible. We searched you before I came in through the hidden passages my mother built into this house. The same passages she used to document your crimes for 6 years before you murdered her. Vincent raised his gun, but I was already moving, diving behind the heavy oak dresser as Detective Chen's voice exploded through the house speaker system. LAPD! Drop your weapons! The house is surrounded! The next 30 seconds were chaos. Tactical teams burst through multiple entry points simultaneously. Vincent fired twice before being tackled by officers in full combat gear. Caroline tried to use Madison as a human shield, but Marcus appeared from another hidden passage and disarmed her with a move that would have made my mother proud. When the dust settled, Caroline and Vincent were in handcuffs. Madison was free and sobbing in relief, and I was sitting on my mother's bed, finally understanding the full scope of what she'd been protecting me from. Detective Chen sat down beside me as the suspects were led away. Your mother was building a case that would have put them away for life. Financial fraud, insurance fraud, murder. We found everything in those files you gave us. Will it be enough to convict them? With the recording from tonight and the evidence Eleanor collected, they'll never see daylight again. I looked out the window at the police cars and news vans filling our circular driveway. Tomorrow, this will be headline news across the country. But tonight, for the first time in 6 years, the house felt safe again. Madison appeared in the doorway, still shaky, but no longer tied up. Eliana, I need you to know, the things I told Caroline about our conversations, I made most of it up. I was trying to protect you by giving her false information. I know, I said, though I wasn't entirely sure I believed her. Trust would take time to rebuild. What happens now? I thought about my mother's watch, safely locked in a vault downtown. I thought about the $300 million that had nearly cost me my life. I thought about Hope Harbor and Tyler's vision of expanding our programs. Now, I said, we figure out how to honor Mom's memory the right way. 6 months after Caroline's arrest, I stood in the empty warehouse space in downtown Los Angeles, watching construction crews install floor-to-ceiling windows that would flood the future Hope Harbor Academy with natural light. The smell of fresh paint and possibility filled the air. The dormitory wing should be finished by Christmas, Tyler said, reviewing blueprints spread across a makeshift table. 24 beds for kids who need temporary housing while we help. Their families get back on their feet. The transformation had been remarkable. What started as a small community center was becoming something unprecedented. A comprehensive campus that could house, educate, and support at-risk youth while providing job training and family services all under one roof. And the kitchen? I asked, looking at the space that would soon feed not just our residents, but hundreds of families in the surrounding neighborhoods. Commercial grade, capable of serving 1,000 meals a day. The culinary arts program starts with our first cohort in January, Tyler grinned. We already have a waiting list of kids who want to learn professional cooking skills. My phone buzzed with a text from Madison. Job interview at 2 p.m. Wish me luck. She'd been living in Koreatown for 4 months now, working as a barista at a coffee shop while taking night classes in social work. The transition from Beverly Hills princess to working student hadn't been easy, but Madison seemed determined to prove she could change. Any word from the Boston Foundation? Tyler asked, referring to my mother's family trust that had agreed to fund our expansion. They're sending a delegation next week to review our progress. If they approve, we'll have enough funding to open 3 more locations across Los Angeles County. It still felt surreal, having access to resources that could transform entire communities. But I was learning to wield that power responsibly, always asking myself what my mother would have wanted. The warehouse door opened, and my father walked in wearing a hard hat and carrying coffee for everyone. Since Caroline's arrest and their subsequent divorce, he'd been spending more time at the construction site than at Wright Industries. The company was practically running itself while he rediscovered his passion for hands-on philanthropy. The security system installation is ahead of schedule, he reported, handing me a steaming cup. Marcus insisted on state-of-the-art everything. Motion sensors, panic buttons, direct line to LAPD. We'd learned the hard way that helping vulnerable populations sometimes meant protecting them from people who preferred they remain vulnerable. The security measures weren't just about theft. They were about ensuring our kids felt safe enough to focus on building better futures. Dad, I've been thinking about the scholarship program, I said, pulling out my own set of documents. What if we didn't just fund college tuition? What if we guaranteed full support, housing, meals, textbooks, even living expenses, for any student who completes our program? My father's eyes lit up. Cradle to career support. Remove every financial barrier between these kids and success. Exactly. And not just traditional 4-year colleges. Trade schools, community colleges, apprenticeships, entrepreneurship programs. Whatever path fits each individual student. Tyler looked up from his blueprints. Do you realize what you're describing? You're talking about a complete social mobility pipeline. Kids could literally transform their family's economic circumstances in a single generation. That's the idea. My phone rang. The caller ID showed the Los Angeles County Jail, Madison, was calling from her weekly visit with Caroline. They'd maintained contact despite everything, though Madison said the conversations were mostly Caroline trying to manipulate her into providing character witness testimony for her upcoming trial. How did it go? I asked when I answered. Strange, as always. Madison's voice was subdued. Caroline keeps insisting she was just trying to protect the family from Vincent, that she was as much a victim as anyone else. Do you believe her? No. But part of me wants to, you know? It's easier than accepting that I lived with a murderer for 6 years. Madison had been in therapy since the arrest, working through not just the trauma of that night, but years of emotional manipulation. Her therapist had explained that Caroline exhibited classic sociopathic behaviors, charm, manipulation, and a complete inability to feel genuine empathy. How's the job interview prep going? Good, I think. It's for a position at a youth crisis center in Silver Lake. Nothing glamorous. Answering phones, filing paperwork, basically being the lowest person on the organizational chart. But it's in the field I want to work in. I smiled, proud of how far she'd come. That's exactly how Tyler and I started. Eliana, there's something else. Caroline mentioned something during our visit that I think you should know about. She said, there are other people, Vincent's associates, who might still be interested in your inheritance. My blood went cold. Vincent Moreau had been remarkably tight-lipped during his arrest and trial, refusing to name any co-conspirators or provide details about his organization's structure. What kind of associates? She wouldn't say much, but she kept mentioning someone called the Collector, someone who specializes in acquiring high-value assets from wealthy families. I exchanged glances with my father and Tyler, both of whom had stopped what they were doing to listen to my side of the conversation. Madison, did Caroline say anything specific about what this person might be planning? Just that Vincent wasn't the only one who knew about Mom's family fortune. There might be others who view you as a target. Great. Just when I thought we could focus on building something positive, the criminal underworld was apparently still interested in my inheritance. After I hung up, my father immediately pulled out his phone. I'm calling Marcus. We need to review security protocols. Dad, we can't live in fear forever. Caroline and Vincent are in prison. Maybe Madison misunderstood. Eliana, your mother spent 2 years investigating Vincent's network before they killed her. She found connections to organized crime families, international money laundering operations, and at least 6 other suspicious deaths involving wealthy widows and their children. This was news to me. Why didn't you mention this before? Because I hoped it died with Vincent's arrest, but if there are other players in this network... He trailed off, then shook his head decisively. We're not taking any chances. Tyler had been unusually quiet during this exchange. Now he looked up from his phone with a concerned expression. I just got a call from Hope Harbor. Someone's been asking questions about our funding sources, our expansion plans, and specifically about Eliana's role in the organization. What kind of someone? Well-dressed man, expensive car, claimed to be a reporter, but couldn't provide press credentials. Our receptionist said he gave her the creeps. My father was already on the phone with Marcus, discussing immediate security upgrades for the Hope Harbor campus. But I found myself thinking about my mother's watch, still safely locked in a bank vault downtown, and wondering if the real value hadn't been the $3 million after all. Tyler, I said slowly, what if we accelerated our timeline? Instead of opening gradually over the next 2 years, what if we launched everything at once, made ourselves too visible, too public, too connected to too many people for anyone to threaten quietly? You want to go bigger? I want to go public. Press conferences, media coverage, celebrity endorsements, political support. Make Hope Harbor Academy so high profile that any attack on us would bring unwanted attention to whoever ordered it. My father finished his call and turned back to us. Marcus will have additional security in place by tonight. But Eliana, you should know, he found some interesting information about this collector person Madison mentioned. What kind of information? The FBI has been tracking someone by that name for 3 years. He's allegedly the head of an international network that targets inherited wealth, particularly from families with historical assets like art, jewelry, or rare collectibles. Like a vintage Patek Philippe that survived the Titanic. The FBI thinks he's responsible for at least 12 deaths across 4 countries, all involving heirs to substantial fortunes who died in apparent accidents shortly after inheriting. I sat down heavily on a nearby crate, the weight of this information settling over me. So we're not just dealing with Vincent's leftovers. We're dealing with a professional organization that kills people for their inheritances. That's what it looks like. Tyler moved closer, his voice determined. Then we definitely need to go public. Fast. Tomorrow, if possible. Tomorrow? I'll call every media contact I have. We'll announce the Hope Harbor Academy expansion, the scholarship program, everything. make you the most famous philanthropist in Los Angeles by the end of the week." My father nodded approvingly. "Sunlight is the best disinfectant. If there are criminals interested in your inheritance, let's make sure the whole world is watching how you use it." As we stood in that empty warehouse, surrounded by construction equipment and blueprints for a better future, I realized my mother's legacy was growing beyond anything she could have imagined. Her watch had saved my life by revealing Caroline's true nature. Her hidden fortune was transforming communities. Her investigation files had brought justice for multiple murder victims, but most importantly, her example was showing me how to use wealth as a force for good rather than a source of corruption. "Okay," I said, standing up and brushing dust off my jeans. "Let's make some noise." Tomorrow, the world would know exactly what Eliana Wright planned to do with her $300 million inheritance. And if there were criminals out there planning to stop me, they'd have to do it under the brightest spotlight we could create. The war for my inheritance was far from over, but I was no longer fighting it alone. I had Tyler, my father, Marcus, and soon an entire community of people who believed in what we were building. More importantly, I had learned something Caroline and Vincent and this mysterious collector hadn't counted on. Sometimes the best way to protect something valuable is to share it with everyone. 1 year later, I stood on the main stage of the Hope Harbor Academy graduation ceremony, looking out at an audience that would have seemed impossible just 18 months ago. The first cohort of students, 37 young people who had completed our comprehensive program, sat in the front rows wearing caps and gowns, many of them the first in their families to graduate from any educational program. In the audience, I spotted faces that told the story of how far we'd all come. My father sat in the third row, next to my mother's older sister Catherine, who had flown in from Boston specifically for this event. The Ashworth Family Foundation had become our largest supporter, contributing not just money but expertise in managing generational wealth responsibly. Tyler stood at the side of the stage, coordinating with the camera crews from 3 different news networks. Our media strategy had worked better than we'd hoped. The Hope Harbor Academy had become a model for comprehensive youth development programs across the country. Politicians visited monthly, celebrities contributed funding, and, most importantly, other cities were replicating our approach. But the face that surprised me most was Madison's. She sat in the 5th row wearing the navy blue uniform of the LA County Department of Children and Family Services, where she'd been working as a case coordinator for 6 months. Her transformation from privileged socialite to dedicated social worker had been gradual but genuine, earning respect from colleagues who initially viewed her with suspicion. "Ladies and gentlemen," I began, my voice carrying across the auditorium through the wireless microphone. 18 months ago, most people would have said the kids graduating today didn't have much of a future. Statistics suggested they'd drop out of school, struggle with unemployment, possibly end up in the criminal justice system. I paused, making eye contact with Maria Santos, our valedictorian, who had arrived at Hope Harbor after aging out of foster care with nowhere to live and no job prospects. She was now headed to UCLA on a full scholarship to study engineering. But statistics don't account for potential. They don't measure determination, creativity, or the power of community support. Most importantly, they don't predict what happens when young people are given not just opportunities, but comprehensive systems designed to help them succeed. The audience erupted in applause as our graduates stood up. These weren't just kids who had completed job training or earned GEDs. They were young adults who had learned financial literacy, received mental health support, developed leadership skills, and built networks of mentors and peers who would support them for years to come. Today, we celebrate 37 individuals who are heading to 4-year universities, community colleges, trade programs, and direct employment with our partner companies. But more than that, we celebrate the families and communities they'll impact for generations to come. After the formal ceremony, I found myself in the Academy's Memorial Garden, a quiet space we'd created to honor people who had influenced our work. At the center stood a simple bronze plaque dedicated to Eleanor Ashworth Wright, with an inscription that read, "She believed that wealth without purpose corrupts, but wealth with vision transforms." "Mom would have loved this," my father said, joining me beside the memorial. "She always said the best investment was in people's potential." "I keep thinking about that morning with the watch," I admitted. "If Madison hadn't thrown it away, we might never have discovered Caroline's crimes. We might never have learned about inheritance. This whole academy might not exist. Eleanor used to say that everything happens for a reason, but we have to choose what that reason becomes." A commotion near the main building caught our attention. Marcus was speaking intensely into his radio while gesturing toward a group of men in expensive suits who were trying to enter the campus despite being denied visitor badges. "Excuse me," one of them called out as we approached. "We're looking for Eliana Wright. We represent some overseas interests who would like to discuss a business proposition." My blood went cold. After a year of high-profile media coverage, international speaking engagements, and public appearances, I'd begun to hope that the collector and his network had moved on to easier targets. "I'm sorry," Marcus said firmly, "but Ms. Wright only takes meetings by appointment through official channels." "Perhaps you could make an exception," the man continued, his accent unplaceable, but his smile predatory. "We've come a very long way to discuss some family heirlooms that might be of mutual interest." Before I could respond, Tyler appeared with 2 uniformed LAPD officers and an FBI agent I recognized from previous briefings about ongoing investigations into international inheritance theft. "Gentlemen," Agent Patricia Kim announced, flashing her credentials, "I'm going to need to see some identification. We've been tracking suspicious activity related to this location." The well-dressed men suddenly seemed much less confident. Their leader, presumably the collector himself, looked directly at me with a cold calculation. "Ms. Wright," he said, "you've made yourself very difficult to approach privately. But eventually, everyone with something valuable finds themselves in a vulnerable position." "Is that a threat?" Agent Kim stepped forward. "Merely an observation about the unpredictable nature of life." I thought about my mother's watch, now displayed in a temperature-controlled case in the Academy's history wing, where students learned about perseverance through adversity. I thought about Caroline and Vincent, serving life sentences for multiple murders. I thought about all the families whose lives had been destroyed by people like this man standing in front of me. "You're right," I said calmly. "Life is unpredictable. For instance, you probably didn't predict that our security cameras have been recording this entire conversation, which will be shared with federal law enforcement agencies in 17 countries where you're currently wanted for questioning." His confident expression faltered slightly. "You also probably didn't predict that we have a direct partnership with the FBI's International Crimes Division, or that threatening a federal witness, which I became when I testified against Vincent, Moreau, carries additional criminal penalties." Agent Kim was already signaling to backup units positioned around the campus perimeter. Within minutes, the business associates were surrounded by law enforcement officers with very different credentials than their obviously forged documents. "Ms. Wright," Agent Kim said as the suspects were led away, "we've been tracking this organization for 3 years. Today's arrest should effectively end their operations in North America." As the police cars disappeared down the street, I realized something profound had shifted. For over a year, I'd been looking over my shoulder, waiting for the next threat to my inheritance or my life. But standing there surrounded by the Hope Harbor Academy campus, buildings full of students pursuing their dreams, staff members dedicated to social justice and security systems designed to protect rather than exclude, I understood that I'd built something bigger than any individual threat could destroy. "Eliana!" Madison jogged over from the parking lot, still wearing her graduation ceremony smile. "I saw the police cars. Is everything okay?" "Better than okay." I think we finally closed the book on Mom's killers and their associates. She hugged me impulsively, something that would have seemed impossible during those bitter morning arguments in Caroline's kitchen. So what's next for the Wright family empire? I looked around at the campus we'd built, thought about the 3 other Hope Harbor academies opening next year in different cities, and considered the scholarship recipients who would graduate from universities across the country over the next decade, I think, I said slowly. We keep building. Mom's watch saved my life by revealing the truth about Caroline. Her inheritance gave me the resources to create all this. But the real legacy isn't the money or the buildings. It's the proof that wealth can be a force for justice instead of corruption. Tyler joined our small group, carrying a tablet displaying social media posts from today's graduation ceremony. You're trending on 3 platforms, he announced. The hashtag Wealth with Purpose is being shared by thousands of people discussing responsible philanthropy. Any word on the federal investigation? I asked. Agent Kim says they recovered evidence linking today's arrests to 17 unsolved murders across 4 continents. Vincent's cooperation in exchange for a reduced sentence helped them map the entire network. My father approached, looking more relaxed than I'd seen him in months. The Boston Foundation Board just approved funding for 5 additional academy locations. They want to make this model available nationwide within 3 years. As the sun set over Los Angeles, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, I walked through the Hope Harbor Academy campus one more time. Students were studying in the library, working in the computer lab, practicing culinary skills in the commercial kitchen, and participating in counseling sessions that would help them overcome trauma and build resilience. In the memorial garden, I paused again at my mother's plaque. I think we did okay, Mom, I whispered. Your watch turned out to be worth a lot more than $3 million. The real value had never been Patek Philippe's monetary worth. It had been the catalyst for discovering truth, claiming justice, and transforming tragedy into purpose. Caroline's act of cruelty, throwing away what she thought was a worthless fake, had ultimately revealed the authentic love and legacy my mother had left behind. My phone buzzed with a text from Maria Santos, our valedictorian. Thank you for believing in us before we believed in ourselves. I smiled, pocketing the phone and heading toward the parking lot where my father waited to drive me home to the house that finally felt like home again. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new students, new opportunities to prove that inherited wealth could be inherited responsibility. But tonight, surrounded by the living proof that second chances can become first opportunities, I felt something I hadn't experienced since my mother died. Complete peace with the path I'd chosen. The girl, who had once worried about affording her own apartment, now oversaw a philanthropic empire worth hundreds of millions of dollars. But more importantly, she had learned that the greatest inheritance wasn't money. It was the wisdom to use power for protecting others instead of protecting yourself. And in that lesson, Eleanor Ashworth Wright's true legacy would continue growing for generations to come. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.